heard some Canada geese flying outside. Go home, be free, go somewhere warmer. I envy you. Anyways, hello, welcome to today's episode. I just queued up my Cronometer app, Cronometer. I think it's Cronometer. So I've been doing like kind of a food themed week because I've recently created a vegan cooking challenge course, which I've talked about already, and you can check out more details of that below. But one thing that someone mentioned that kind of got my mind thinking about this that I wanted to share, related to food, is nutrition tracking. And there's this really fabulous app for both Android and iPhones called Cronometer. And it's the nicest food tracking app that I've ever used. So the free version is pretty functional, like you can get all kinds of detailed reports on your nutritional intake and stuff like that. It's a really aesthetic, so I've used things like, no offense to MyFitnessPal, but it's not as detailed and it's kind of an ugly app. Cronometer is beautiful, it's colorful, and it gives like really great visual breakdowns of things. So what I like about it and why I've used it, I guess for like the last 11 years or so, I've been a vegan and I've been a vegetarian for even longer. So I've gone through periods where I've tracked my food intake just to get a sense of what my daily nutritional intake looks like. I wanted to see if, obviously there's going to be day-to-day variations on a bunch of nutrients, but I wanted to get a sense of, is there a nutrient in particular that I'm consistently falling short on? Or are there nutrients that I really don't need to worry about? Just that kind of thing. Getting a proper sense of like my own consumption intake, especially as a vegan, just wanting to make sure of that. And one thing that I realized is that the nutrients that people would always ask me about, like calcium or protein or iron or things like that, I'm like always above on those ones, even as a female where I have much higher iron intake needs than say like a male, especially because of my age bracket. I think it's like something like 28 milligrams of iron every day that we need, but I was always over. And part of that is because like the calcium I'm usually good with because I drink like fortified milks. So it's fortified with calcium just like dairy milk is. So the nutrients and protein, like I eat a lot of beans and stuff like that, and even on the days that I don't, I eat a lot of whole grain products as well. So even like whole wheat pasta or whole wheat bread is still like reasonably high in protein, even though it's not like an overt protein source. So as long as I'm eating the required amount of calories, which, let's face it, I'm a big eater, so I'm always like at the calorie intake requirements, then those major nutrients tend to be covered. So I've never had any issues with like protein intake or anything like that. Now the nutrients that were interesting to me that I'm like, okay, so like selenium was something that I wasn't always having, or like just sort of more obscure ones, or zinc was sometimes a little on the lower end when I wasn't having legumes, for example. And just being able to recognize these patterns and say, okay, so I didn't get a ton of zinc, or my potassium sodium balance isn't ideal. Generally you want I think like the minimum, you want your potassium intake to be about double your sodium intake, but even better if it's like 4 times your sodium intake. So if you consume 1,000 milligrams of sodium, you'd want like 2,000 to 4,000 milligrams of potassium. So looking at things like that and looking at my potassium intake, I would say, okay, I'm a little low today, but like what were the major sources of potassium? And Cronometer will actually show you, okay, of all the foods you ate today, these foods contributed this amount of whatever nutrient you're searching for. So I can actually go in and see like, oh wow, eating sweet potatoes is like massively high in potassium, or regular potatoes or beans are all very good sources of potassium. So then I can recognize that and think, okay, well I want to make sure I'm getting like adequate potassium today. So then it kind of gives me a mental model for when I'm feeding myself of what's going to cover those bases. Or even doing something as simple as having a spoonful of flax in my oatmeal to have like a higher intake of omega-3s or things like that. So enormously helpful in determining what nutrients that I really need to make sure that I'm maximizing, especially because I only take 2 supplements. And I think these are supplements that most people should take, as far as my research has led me. I mean, I'm obviously not a doctor, but what I take is vitamin D, because especially in the winter, I live in a northern climate. We manufacture vitamin D from the sun. And there's no really good food sources of it unless there's a food source that's supplemented with vitamin D. So for example, dairy milk and non-dairy milk is fortified with vitamin D, but not a lot of it, just a little bit. So since there's not enough UV rays coming through at this time of year, I do like a daily 1,000 international units of vitamin D every day, and basically as much as I can remember. And I also do like a weekly sublingual vitamin B12 supplement of 2,500 micrograms. There we go. Now, B12 is one of those weird ones because it's also not a nutrient that's found in food. It's a bacteria. So our lack of B12 in general as a society has more to do with the sanitized conditions that we live in. So B12 is found in animals because animal food tends to be more contaminated with bacteria. Whereas if you're buying like carrots from the store, they've been like super washed and everything. So there's like, it's not going to have any like traces of dirt or things on it that would contain that bacteria. I mean, it's somewhat likely that if you're not washing your vegetables and you dig them up from the garden, you're not washing them super well, you might get some vitamin B12 from it, but it's not a very reliable thing. So B12 is a super safe supplement, and it doesn't point to a lack of nutritional value in a vegetarian diet. It more points to just the modern world in which we live in, where everything is super, super, super clean. So so I take that as a weekly supplement, and it's actually like when I've researched this, I think they actually recommend that people, like all people over age 50, take vitamin B12 because your ability to absorb B12 from food sources actually diminishes over time. And most cases of vitamin B12 deficiency are in older people as opposed to vegetarian people. So that's just something that I researched. But aside from that, like I don't take a multivitamin, I don't do anything like that. Definitely don't take iron supplements or anything hardcore. Like iron supplements are really hard on your body. So so I like to intermittently do nutrition tracking just to make sure that I'm on the right track. And I haven't run into any like major problems or anything like that. I was really diligent about nutrition tracking when I was pregnant. I did it like literally every single day. And everything was great. So it was a really like easy pregnancy, really healthy. The one thing that tracking my nutrients does as well, like that I find really useful, is it makes me more aware of my calorie intake. So it's kind of like a side benefit that if I'm paying attention to what I eat, spending 10 minutes a day, like tracking it in my like digital, like my app, my Cronometer app, then I'm more mindful to just like not eat a bunch of junk food. I'm not even trying to. So when I'm tracking my food, I'm not like, okay, I'm on a diet, let's track my food. It's more like the very act of tracking it allows me to be more aware of what I'm consuming and maybe do things like, I should eat an apple instead of a brownie. Just because I know that that's going to actually give me like better nutrition stats. It's almost like a weird way of gamifying things. So in terms of like just health and even like a little bit of weight loss by accident almost, I love nutrition tracking. It's very, very interesting. It doesn't matter what your diet is. I highly recommend like even just a week. Like track what you're eating for a week. Don't do anything different. Don't do anything overly special. Just like a regular week of what you're eating. And then you should be able to get a pretty good sense of like, okay, what's your average calorie intake every day? What's your average sodium intake every day? Or whatever nutrients that you happen to be interested in. And once you have that snapshot, you can kind of then assess, okay, so I'm consuming a lot of sodium every day. How can I kind of bump that back a little bit? Or I'd really like to consume more potassium. How can I bump that up a little bit? And things like that. So really, really, really useful thing to do. I've probably been doing this intermittently for a decade. I'll usually do it for like a month at a time and then like every year or two. Like I said, with the exception being when I was pregnant. But it's one other thing that I want to say about this app before I finish up this video is that you can actually customize your targets as well. So what I don't like is the default targets that it sets you up with. I think when I when I signed up for an account, the percentages were like nuts. It was like 25% protein, like 35% fat, and like 40 or 50% carbohydrates, whatever the difference is. And it was like, this is a wild, like that ratio does not work for me. It has never worked for me. I've never enjoyed or benefited from like any type of like crazy high protein diet, which 25% is very, very high. So I usually veer more towards like 10 to 15% of my daily calories being protein. I usually favor carbohydrates over fats because I find when I consume too much fat, not only do I tend to gain weight because fat calories are like it's very easy to eat something rich or oily and eat a lot of it because fat calories don't add a lot of bulk. If you add an avocado to something, like the amount of calories, and avocados are super healthy, but like if you add an avocado to something, the calories in like a small avocado, just like wildly different. Like you could have like 3 or 4 apples and have it be the same amount of calories, but like the volume is totally different. So something about like consuming, I tend to overconsume calories when I have too much fat, and I also tend to, like, it can hurt my stomach. It makes me feel kind of queasy when I have too much fat. So what I find to be a really good ratio for me is like 20 to 25% of my calories from fat. That's usually when I feel best. I feel best when I consume a high carbohydrate diet, which means lots and lots of vegetables, grains, and legumes, and just kind of centering, and fruit as well, and centering my diet around those things with little bits of fat. So like a little bit of nuts, like consuming some nuts or avocado or things like that every day is so good, and I like to do that. But I can overdo it and feel crappy when I do. I like that on Cronometer you can customize what your own daily percentages, like what you want them to be, based on your own nutritional needs and stuff like that. So really, really cool, really good app. I highly recommend it. I mean, it's not like I'm affiliated with Cronometer or anything like that. I get so much personal value from it, and I wanted to share it with you because maybe you will as well. I'll catch you tomorrow.